Right, so what we're going to do now is actually work with getting the payload of basically the user's stuff, like the user's details. And once we've done this, once we've created this method, we'll go ahead and print this to the page, do a print R on this, and you'll see all of the information that we have available about the user. So their Google ID and their email, whether their email is verified or not. We'll look at this in a moment. So let's, inside of our construct, get the payload for the user. And this will only be available if they're an access token set, because if an access token isn't set, they're not signed in. So let's do a print R on get payload. So a get payload method on this class, which we don't actually have at the moment. So let's create it. So at the moment, let's just return an empty array, and we just see an empty array. So in fact, let's do a wrapping of pre-tags here, and this will just give us a better structured output so we can see things a little bit more clearly. So what we're going to do is under get payload, this will basically get all of the information about the currently signed in user. Are we signed in? No. So we're not signed in at the moment. But when we do sign in, remember we have the access token available. So let's sign in quickly just so we have this information available to work with. Cool. So let's just refresh. So the reason that happened, by the way, is just because I was outputting at the top here and we used the header. There was already data sent. Ordinarily, you wouldn't see this unless you were outputting stuff up here. But in your case, you're not going to be because we're doing all this logic at the top. So we're logged in. Let's get the payload. So we want to check if the access token is available or not. So we could call the check token method, but we're going to directly access the get access token method on the client. So let's do an if statement in here. We'll say this client get access token. That basically says, are we logged in? So if we are, let's just echo out this client get access token as we've done above. We now know that we have that access token possibly available. And we should see that. Let's just check what we're doing here. This payload. Oh, okay. Obviously, we're already setting the access token, so we don't really need to do this. Actually, let's just work with the data we get back. So let's do a return this client verify ID token, and we want to get the attributes associated with the user. So remember, we're doing a print R on this, so we see number of segments in token. Okay, so if we just go over here, what we're doing at the moment is we're basically trying to get the payload here in the wrong place. So we're not actually going to be doing this. This is purely for testing. But if, for example, down here we were to say if not auth URL, remember at the moment this is what we're determining if the user's signed in. Basically, if a authentication URL hasn't been generated, we can assume that the user's signed in. We're then going to say get the get payload. In this case, what's going to happen is we will see just the sign in link. We click sign in, we click on this, we hit accept, we go through, and we see the payload Cool. So it's obviously for testing purposes. We're going to see errors here. We'll wrap this up properly in a moment. So what we see here is we have a payload, which we're going to grab in a moment, and we have all sorts of information. ID here is the Google ID. We're going to be storing this inside of our database, remember, under the Google ID field. We've also got the email address of the user as well. Email here. We've got whether the email is verified or not, and all sorts of other information. So what we're going to be doing now is we are going to be actually outputting this payload, but then using that to store these user details. Let's get rid of this. And we want to say here this store user get payload. So we don't really need to do this in the construct. At the moment, if we create a new method, public function store user, and payload is here, this we obviously get the error here because it's being called at the wrong time. So what we can do here is we can get this maybe, and we can add this inside of we're obviously going to do this inside of login, aren't we? So obviously we test this out up here, it's not working. We pop it in here. So once the user has logged in, we then store this information. There. That will go ahead and that will store the information if it doesn't exist. Now bear in mind that what we're actually doing here is we are only running this when this code is available. So it won't run every time, despite the fact we're calling auth login here. It won't run every single time you refresh the page. So let's start to test this out then. Store users taking a payload. At the moment, this payload only contains an array. We want to convert this to an object, and then we want to extract the payload from this. There's a quick and sort of probably you could say efficient way of grabbing or converting an array into an object. We basically JSON encode the array, and then we do a JSON decode directly after that, and that will basically turn that into an object. So we do a print on this on payload, and we log out and sign back in, hit my account. You can now see we've got an object and we've got all of the information that we need here. So if we do a search for payload, you can see here we've got the payload with the ID, the email, etc., etc. So now that we've got that, we can pass in just the payload or return just the payload, and here we call store user with this payload. So now if we do an echo on this, and we do a print R with pre-tags, we'll now see that if we sign in, accept, we get all of this information that we need. And we want to extract the ID and the email and store them. So instead of doing the print R one here, we will create an SQL string. Let's pull this down a couple of lines and start to write our query. Now remember, we set the Google ID field. In fact, let's just describe the Google users table. Okay, so we've got an ID auto increment. This will just auto increment, so we don't need to define this within our query. The Google ID is unique, so we can use the on duplicate key update part of a query to basically perform some kind of useless action like ID equals ID. And basically adding this makes sure that we don't replace the record. All we do is just ignore it. We just do some pointless operation if this already exists. And obviously the email will add to that as well. So inside of the query, we want to insert into Google users, choose the fields that we want to insert into, which are Google ID and email, and the values are payload ID, and in single quotes, this is really important, because the Google IDs are decimal, we don't need single quotes around it, payload email. Now is the on duplicate key, so on a duplicate of a unique, update ID equals ID. This is a useless operation. It does absolutely nothing. It's the same as saying 0 equals 0 basically. So this will only work if you have this set to a unique field. So if you're finding that you complete this and every time you log in with the same user it creates another field, it's because this isn't unique. Cool. So now that we've done this, let's run a query. Well, how do we run a query? Remember, we dependency injected, if we go over to index, DB into Google Auth. So what we can now do is say this DB query SQL, because we have this attached here, set here from here. Cool. So let's do a select everything from Google users, empty set. So let's get rid of this. Let's log out and let's sign in with this account. Let's accept that. Okay, so that's been stored along with my Google ID. Let's log out and try it with another one. And it's stored that as well along with the Google ID. Let's log out and try it with the same account as we've already logged in with, just to check that the details don't repeat. And there we go. So on a duplicate key, this has just been basically nothing's happened. The ID is the same, the ID here is the same, the email is the same, nothing's changed. So we've now stored the user information about the user. You can use the ID, you can store that in a session yourself, or you can use the Google ID to basically identify this user now. You can update details in that database table based on their ID on that record.